You went to Afghanistan in December 2007, and you had already experienced combat in Iraq. And one of the things you write is that you, as you were going back into a war zone, you said, I needed to redeem myself. What did you mean by that? That you wanted to, or that you felt that you needed to redeem yourself in a war zone?
So I kind of felt Ramadi was a confusing place. It was a confusing time, I think, in the war, at least the time I was in Ramadi. It was before
Yeah.
the surge, it was before any of that stuff. And so a lot of us were left wondering what we were doing and what our mission was. And so I think some of the actions that some of us took, reflecting on it after that deployment, I felt like, why did I make that decision? Why did I do that? Why did our Marines die and our sailors die? And why did we kill some of those people? What were we doing there? And
Mm.
so I felt like it was a confusing time. Um, and I felt like Afghanistan was a lot more cut and dry at that time. It was like, this is Taliban. We're fighting the Taliban. It's not just random fighters who are getting paid, $100 to pull a trigger on an IED for us. The Taliban were a lot better fighters, and so it felt like a lot more of a reasonable um, choice to go to combat. So, and then also on that too, I think for redemption for me is a lot of the guys I served with in Ramadi, they were two and three-time combat veterans, and if I had gotten out after my second deployment, I felt like I didn't do enough. As much as that might sound
Mm.
weird reflecting on it, I felt like I still needed to serve more to do justice for like Marty and Kanan, the guys that died in Ramadi. I wanted to earn my freedom even more so than when we did in Ramadi. So I felt that going to combat again was something that for me personally would say, I did enough.
When you say that you wanted to go back to Afghanistan to redeem yourself, so I mean, part of that is, you serve with guys who saw three combat tours,
Yeah.
and you felt like, to rise to their level, I need to do that too. Um, but it sounds like there's also a sense that just in terms of things that you did as an individual, you felt like there were things that needed to be made up for, if possible, or in some sense. Um, can you give an example of something that happened that you felt like, you know, I can't undo it, but maybe in some way I can kind of make up for it in a different context, in the context of Afghanistan?
Sure. And that was probably the one that stands out the most is a killing that had happened that it was an inquiry or an investigation that had happened. I'm not sure what the right word was for that. I was within the ROEs to take the action I had done, but it was a very um, uncertain time. It was like, okay, this guy's in our wire. Um, we were told to kill anyone that's in the wire, and I couldn't see a weapon, but I also didn't see how he got there. And so I thought, well, did he place an IED because we had already had an IED attack at that point where someone just kind of walked up and dumped one, and then it blew up. And luckily, no one was injured, but it destroyed a Humvee. And so instead of waiting there to see what he was doing, to see that he might blow something up, I told him to stop, and he looked up, and he just kept like doing his thing, and so I shot him. And after that, it was not, no ID was found, nothing was found, but it's that uncertainty, and I felt, the weight of that. I think the weight of killing someone that's not like pointing a gun at you and shooting at you. Um, it bears a, it bears an unexplainable amount of weight, I think. And I think people that I've talked with about it agree with that. And it's something that we don't really talk about because there's a lot of shame involved, and there's a lot of yeah, like just confusion. But I think bringing it to the foreground and talking about it and saying, this does happen, um, made it real and made it something that could be addressed. And in my case, addressing it meant going back and hoping that as a leader and as a infantry squad leader, as a team leader, making sure that I could help other young Marines not make that same mistake to carry that burden the rest of their life. That was a win in my book, and that's what the redemption is, I think, more than anything.
After your combat tour in Iraq, my understanding is that you didn't have any intention of making a career of the Marines, but you did extend to go into MARSOC. And
Yes.
and was that already, was part of your thinking already, okay, and I'm not going to make a career out of this, but I will extend to go into MARSOC with the hope that I will be able to go back into a combat situation. And I can't redo that tour in Iraq, but but I can take the lessons I learned with me and maybe help younger, more junior Marines not make some of the same mistakes. So when your decision to extend for MARSOC, was this part of your thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had talked to my wife about it when we were on leave from my second deployment, which was the 31st MEU, out in Okinawa, China, and the Philippines. We came back from that, and that's when this opportunity with MARSOC came about. And so I spoke with my wife about it and said, "Hey, I think I had just finished. I was a team leader on that deployment, and I started seeing an end of the Marine Corps that was a little more structured, especially the professional schools had been done with some of the Marines on that deployment, and it just felt a lot better. So I said, well, I felt like it was a waste to have taken the training that I had done and then just leave the Marine Corps when I have combat experience and all that. So
Yeah. You already have then a tour in Iraq behind you and significant combat in Ramadi. December 2007, when you arrive in Afghanistan, at that time, apart from the personal thing that you had in your mind, what did the conflict in Afghanistan mean to you? And, kind of the way I think about it is, if a Marine next to you on the plane on the way over asks you, what is the point? Why are we in Afghanistan? What is this all about? What do you think you would have said at that time?
we're fighting the Taliban. We're fighting a terrorist organization that supported 9/11 and loose. It's not Al Qaeda, but um, you know, it's someone that is supporting the similar ideology, and we're trying to rid the world of them. And so they were our enemy, and that made more sense to me. They were more of a fighting force, and so I was looking, um, I was looking at it from that end. And I should say too, but before we went to Afghanistan, up until I think it was a week before we left for Afghanistan, or 2 weeks, we thought we were going to Samara, Iraq, and
Oh, wow.
and so we didn't find out until like last minute that we were going to go to Afghanistan, and but that was still the same thought process as we're going to go fight the Mujahideen or whoever, someone that's affiliated with our enemy who attacked us on 9/11.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and knowing that I was with MARSOC, what we had been told up to that point is like we're going to be in heavy combat. Um, some of the guys went as far to say, hey man, it's not like this isn't going to be good for us when we get to Samara, because they were, you know, allegedly bringing weapons in from the neighboring country, and it was just like that was one of the routes they were using. So we were going to try to disrupt that. And so that again was a mission for me that made sense. Let's disrupt the tools that are being brought in to kill American forces.
Was it a psychological advantage in Afghanistan that you knew who the enemy was, the Taliban? Whereas, I mean, even the way you just kind of expressed it, speaking about Iraq, that, you know, um, I figured exactly how you said it. I think it's something like, some of these folks were linked to, it linked indirectly to folks who, might have been involved in somewhere or another with 9/11. And it always seems that looking at Iraq, it's hard to know from week to week who we're fighting. Are these gangsters? Are these
Yeah,
foreign fighters? Are these former government people? Um, Whereas in Afghanistan, okay, at least we have one word for the enemy, and we know who they are. Is that right? Does that fit?
100%. Yeah. It felt like, when you're training training as a Marine, at least in that time, um, all the pre-mission briefs and everything gave like PLA or like some kind of enemy that was a known, um, force that's proud of who they're affiliated with. Um, and so I was proud to be going up against, when I found out we were going to Afghanistan, it was like, nice. We kind of get an opportunity to fight somewhat of a conventional military, as much as that is, because they, work together. They're trained to some level, more so than a lot of the people we saw in Ramadi. And so it felt more like this is going to be as close as of a fight as we could get to, you know, one force against another in that era.
And is that what you experienced a few minutes ago? You said, we anticipated going into heavy combat. Is that what you experienced in Afghanistan?
Well, and that was from when they had led us up to that with possibly going to Samara. In
Samara, yeah.
Afghanistan, we didn't know
Mm.
really what to expect. We had some heads up because there were only, I think, two other Marine Raider or MARSOC battalions there at the time, or companies at the time. And so the one we were replacing gave us a lot of feedback as to the kind of the fighting we were expected to see. Um, but for us, it was really kind of an unknown because we were in an area that was mainly controlled by British forces and Danish. And there was one Green Beret team there that was kind of our part. We were on the same fob with. It was Fob Price, which just outside of Goresh in Helmand province. But they were doing a kind of a different mission. So our mission set was to do combat. We called it combat reconnaissance patrols. So it was go out, um, doing reconnaissance, see where the enemy are, and then once we're in contact, we're doing combat and we're killing the enemy and basically making note of the areas that we found all of our resistance. And from what I understand of our time there, what we did was with a lot of that feedback coupled with the previous MARSOC units that were there and Green Beret teams, they determined where they wanted to build fob Leatherneck um, from those.
So it's not, I'm used to talking to Vietnam vets who talk about recon, and in that case, recon is in the context of Vietnam, most times it's go out, find the enemy, locate the enemy, but don't engage the enemy. You just bring that intelligence back. But it sounds like in your case, you're finding them and engaging them, and I'm imagining also bringing in fire support and things like that too. Is that right?
Correct, yeah, and that's why I even found it ironic, if you want to say, or kind of funny when we found out we were going to be doing something they called CRPs, combat reconnaissance patrols, because I had just finished infantry squad leader school at the time, and like a combat patrol is completely different from a reconnaissance patrol, and you usually don't lump those together like you just said. So it was an interesting take on it. It was basically just movement to contact, but on a very large scale. We were just hopping from town to town because we'd stay out for a few days at a time, sleep in the middle of the desert, and just move to contact.
How would you characterize as a fighting force? How would you assess the Taliban as compared to the adversaries you dealt with in Iraq?
I mean, comparing them with, the adversaries in Iraq were very infrequently organized. A lot of times it was just a couple people, shooting at us. A couple times there were a squad size element of um, not very well organized militiamen, I would say. Whereas the Taliban were, a military trained unit. Some of those had been trained from, Afghans that were fighting the Russians back in the 80s. There was a lot more experience. I felt like there was more experience and more know-how with the Taliban, and that became evident when a few times they were bracketing us with mortars, which is a
Hmm.
technique we use is bracketing, right? And so we were intercepting their communications, and we heard a mortar round go off, and then it went far, went long. And then the next one fell short, and then the next one came closer, and so It was like they're bracketing us, and we're intercepting the communications and hearing that they are making the adjustments. So um, I was kind of like, wow, that's kind of cool, as much as it's
Yeah.
scary to be in that time, but it's just also like we're fighting a force that knows what they're doing, and um, and they're brave, and it felt like okay, we're fighting brave men, not um, in a sense cowards with some of the ways that we saw fighting in Iraq. At the time, I felt like we did a very good job interfacing with a lot of the locals. We'd bring supplies, we'd bring food, school supplies, shoes, just all these things on our travels. And if there weren't enemy in the villages that we were visiting, we were handing out those things, and it meant a lot. I know it appeared that the locals really appreciated us being there. Um, and the feedback we got from the interpreters was in alignment with that. And the other thing that I'm proud of is that we kind of helped establish where the future operations for the Marine Corps were going to be out of, um, based on what information we gathered from contact and other sources out there. So, from my small window of time in Afghanistan, I think that was a very successful thing we did. And the other thing is we didn't lose any Marines there. There were guys injured, but no one died. And so
Mm,
to go to war and come back with everyone is phenomenal.
right.
And so I'm very proud, not that we have all the control of that, but they weren't using IEDs in the extent that they were later. And I talked to guys who had been in Sangin, which is one of the better known areas of conflict in Afghanistan after we were there. And we drove through Sangin. I think one time drove all the way through town, never even had contact, never had an IED go off. And so it was a very different feeling for that war. We didn't see one IED. It was all conventional warfare. We had,
Wow.
RPGs, mines. We dealt with mines, but that was something different. Um, we
Mm.
dealt with small arms fire, obviously, and mortars, and using A-10s to help support us, and even F-16s or F-18s, whatever they were. So it was it was an amazing experience to have that compared to what I had in Ramadi. And so for me, it feels like it was a great deployment because we came back with everyone.
So you have these things that, in that context, in that time, feel like success. And I think you said earlier that the work you did kind of set the stage for the establishment of Camp Leatherneck. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were a part of that. Yeah.
So, did you ever think about the bigger picture of what winning the war in Afghanistan, the country that we think of as Afghanistan? And I'm not, as I've talked with vets over the years, I'm not sure that everybody in Afghanistan really thought of the concept of Afghanistan the way we think of the concept of Afghanistan. But did you ever think about, winning in that sort of cosmic sense of what that would mean, or was your attention always just focused on what you were doing and the mission of the moment?
Yeah, my attention was always at the mission of the moment, but also like bringing food to people and being a lot more um vulnerable, I guess, as a Marine to the people we interfaced with. So not being so hard and standoffish, but trying to be human. Um, like I think looking at that and saying this will help benefit anyone else that is coming after us. Coming into the country after us, this might help build a better relationship with the U.S. government. And so from that end, that's how I looked at it. But I never really said, I think I didn't have the greatest hopes. I recall a few times like talking with guys that, the Russians have tried this. So many other people have tried, you know, doing something in Afghanistan. It just doesn't work. And so I guess my mentality was, okay, well, how can I make the time that I'm here worthwhile and hopefully better someone else's life, um, and leave standing tall versus constantly wondering what we're doing there and bickering. So I didn't really have that experience, and then reflecting on it later after I got back, it was kind of like, what was the end goal? We are fighting an ideology and a group of people who will go further than we will for to get the outcome that they want. So there's no way we could win that. And but at the time, given the circumstances and um given what we were there doing, I'm proud of that. That's the
Sure.
best we could do.